What's going on, guys? It's your boy Kev here, back with another video. Tonight's video is going to be a little different, guys. I'm not going over prize picks or any DFS stuff, and I guess it's kind of considered season-long stuff, but I just found it very interesting. It's something I wanted to do. Had a lot of fun making it, and I was talking to some of my buddies about this topic, and I just wanted to, kind of dive into it because I was curious myself. And that topic is, what are some of the best draft picks historically in terms of where people were drafted, their ADP, and how they ended up finishing? What were, some of the biggest steals and sleepers of drafts? So I want to go over that, and I'm going to make this kind of a fun video, guys, where I go over the best, in my opinion, from what the data I found, the best overall pick from each year over the past decade. So, if it's obviously if you drafted someone in the 4th round and they finished as the number 1 running back, that's pretty good. Not pretty good, that's amazing, but I'm looking for something even better than that. I'm looking for people who are super deep sleepers and absolutely outperform that. So I'm going to go through that right now, and we're going to start with the number 1 player on the board. So for 2011, guys, like I said, we're going over the past decade. 2011, we got Jordy Nelson. Jordy Nelson had an ADP of 122 overall during this year and was the 45th wide receiver taken off the board. 45th wide receiver. You got to think, guys, that puts him in that realm of, I don't even know, wide receiver 5 territory or something like that. Just definitely not someone you're thinking about using or starting. But he finished that year with 1,263 receiving yards and 15 touchdowns, making him the 4th wide receiver in PPR and 2nd in standard. He didn't catch a ton of balls, but what he did with that was amazing with the yardage and the TDs. So obviously he was even a little bit better in standard. Crazy. Obviously we know Jordy went on to be basically a top 10 overall pick every year after. He was absolutely lights out when he was on the Packers, and kind of became the norm for him. Next year, 2012, guys, was Tony Gonzalez, tight end. This is his 2nd to last year in the league. I think people thought he was out the door a little bit, and it wasn't the craziest latest ADP we've ever seen, but he was being drafted around 90th overall. People thought Tony was probably on his way out the door. He was done, but he proved he still had it. He finished with nearly 100 receptions that year and outpaced every other tight end in PPR except for Jimmy Graham. So what a crazy year, especially on his way out the door, being older and getting up there. I had him the following year where he finished top 2 again, actually, and then he officially, I think, retired after that, I believe. But absolutely incredible year from possibly the tight end GOAT, as a lot of people like to see him that way, and absolutely lights out, being taken at 90th overall, essentially. Next year was Peyton Manning in 2013. I'll tell you guys right now, not a ton of players on this list I had, but Peyton Manning was one of them. This was my first year doing fantasy football, and he's one of the best draft picks of all time for his ADP. He was being taken in, I believe, the 4th round, which is still pretty early, especially for this list. I said I didn't want to go over people like that necessarily, but for what he did, you got to touch on it. He broke the touchdown record and absolutely smoked the field. So we're looking for, huge value, and it's not that just he came in first. He had 50 points more than the number 2 quarterback and 100 points more than the number 3 quarterback. And even in this rushing QB league we have now, over the past 8 years, there's only been 2 quarterback performances that were actually better than Peyton Manning's 2013 season, and he didn't run at all, which is crazy to think about. He threw, I think it was 55 touchdowns, and Drew Brees was the number 2 quarterback that year, and he had a phenomenal year for Drew Brees. And like I said, I feel bad because he was shadowed. Any other year, we'd be talking about Drew Brees. But Peyton Manning just outpaced him with that absolutely incredible year. So got to go over the, give it up for Peyton Manning and outpacing everyone else in the field by that margin. So that was huge for him in 2013. Moving on to 2014. I actually did have OBJ here, but I was on the wrong side of this one because I sold him hot. I picked him up, or I drafted him, and I sold him hot, sold him high, and he just kept doing what he was doing. I didn't think any rookie could keep that up, but he did. And OBJ in 2014 was incredible. He finished 7th in PPR his rookie year. This is incredible. This is still, hearing this now, has to be some bias why we still think Odell has it, and a little gas in the tank, even with all those injuries, even with all those years and kind of downtrodden performances. It's just insane. He finished 7th in PPR in his rookie year with a stat line of 91 catches for 1,300 yards and 12 touchdowns, and he missed 4 games. He missed 4 games and finished that well. And this was in a monster year. I absolutely encourage you guys to go check out that 2014 year for wide receivers. It was absolutely loaded. So to finish 7th amongst that field, missing 4 games is incredible. And because of the injury, he missed, I think, all of preseason. He missed the first 4 games of the year. He wasn't drafted. He was going undrafted in most leagues. So that has to be one of the best performances of all time in terms of ADP, because he wasn't drafted. There was no ADP. And this kind of, unfortunately shadowed another great pick during this year that I'm just going to throw in just to mention because it is a funny little throwback. Was journeyman Justin Forsett was a close second this year, going undrafted as well and finishing 8th at RB, which is crazy, super impressive, super value RB pick. And, that one would have absolutely topped the charts if OBJ wasn't going undrafted and doing this in 12 games, which is, again, absolutely ludicrous. But moving on, we have 2015. We're going to go. There's a couple I want to touch on this one. This is just going to be called the tight end picture in 2015. So I'm going to lead off by saying there was someone else who could have made this list for 2015 that I won't talk about too much, but it was Blake Bortles. Blake Bortles had an awesome year. He finished 4th at QB with 4,500 passing yards, 300 rushing yards, and 37 total touchdowns, and he was being undrafted. That was amazing, and maybe that is better than what I'm going to talk about tight end. But just looking at the tight end picture as a whole, it was incredible. The number 2, the number 3, and the number 4 tight end are the ones I want to talk about this year. Absolutely incredible. I can't remember who finished number 1, but it was someone you'd expect, like a Gronk, I believe it was, or something like that, or Jimmy G or whatever it was. But this was absolutely incredible for what these 3 did. So I'll go number 2 was Delanie Walker. That's why I have his picture up. Number 2 was Delanie Walker. He had an insane season of 94 catches for almost 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns. As someone who was drafted over 100, he was around 103 ADP. That is insane. Absolute monster tight end year. And then at number 3 was Jordan Reed, who kind of had his breakout, 87 catches, 952 yards, 11 touchdowns, he was drafted way later. So I just said Delanie Walker was 103. Jordan Reed was 178, which is just absolutely fucking mental. 178, and he finished with 11 TDs and nearly 1,000 yards. And then just to close it out, guys, a guy, pretty one-hit wonder that we forget about, but Gary Barnidge went undrafted that year, as you'd expect. Didn't expect a lot from him. This is after, I believe it was... who was it? Jordan Cameron was, they leaving Cleveland there, or he's hurt or something. I don't know what, I can't remember exactly what happened, but Gary Barnidge filled that role, and he finished 4th at tight end, being undrafted. He had nearly 1,000 yards. Actually, sorry, he had over 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. So 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns as an undrafted tight end is absolutely crazy. I know he was a big help and was a league winner that year because, a lot of people were struggling at tight end, but had good positional players everywhere else. And now you got this free piece that is just a top 5 tight end with, consistent performances every week. So that was a huge leverage play, and that's what we're talking about, guys. Leverage plays here and good ADP values. So moving on, the next one we have is another tight end, Kyle Rudolph. Super unsexy player. Didn't actually, I don't believe, have as good a year as any of the 3 tight ends I just mentioned. I could be wrong with that. But for where he was drafted in 2016, you got to give him respect. This is a year where Michael Thomas and Devontae Adams had their breakout seasons. They finished 7th and 9th at receiver, and I almost put them in this one, but you got to give it up for Rudolph. He was undrafted in most leagues. I remember, I think I did end up picking him up this year, actually, if I do recall. I think I was struggling at tight end and grabbed him, and I didn't realize he did this well. Was undrafted in most leagues. He led the NFL in targets for tight ends, and he only finished 2nd behind Travis Kelce. Like I said, not as impressive as a year statistically as the other guys I just mentioned, but finishing 2nd behind Travis Kelce as an undrafted player, that is just huge leverage, and that is someone that obviously no one expected to do that. So big play for Kyle Rudolph that year. Moving on, 2017, we have Alvin Kamara. No-brainer here with Alvin Kamara in 2017. His ADP in 2017 was 147, or the 12th round. Imagine getting Alvin Kamara in the 12th round. It's absolutely incredible. Nobody had any idea that he was going to be this big of a threat, like a PPR monster he is. Absolutely amazing. I mean, he still is. We see it now. And this was on a team that had Mark Ingram as kind of the bell cow back at that time. So he had a great rushing year, but he only had 728 rushing yards. I mean, I think he still averaged 6.1 yards a carry, but 728 rushing yards is just obviously not enough to do what he did, because he actually finished 3rd at running back in PPR. Way outpaced Mark Ingram. But obviously, being PPR and what we just talked about, it was because of his receptions. He had 826 receiving yards on 81 catches. Absolutely ludicrous. So he actually had more receiving yards than he had rushing yards. This was even more catches than CMC that year. I think he only finished in terms of receiving behind Lev Bell, and that was one of those big Lev Bell years. So absolutely incredible. Alvin Kamara finishing third in PPR at running back. I mean, that's a running back, too. You have to give big respect for finishing higher in running back. That's not something you see. You see in wide receiver sometimes. You do see in quarterback sometimes. Tight end. Tight end's always fluky. But to finish third at running back, being drafted, 150th essentially, is absolutely incredible. But let's get it over to another running back. Not quite as impressive as Kamara, but also super impressive was James Conner in 2018. Though not quite as impressive as we just talked about as Kamara, what he did with his ADP was also incredible. He was being drafted around the 170th spot that year, and I think that was obviously before we got the Lev Bell news. Lev Bell was, having contract disputes later on. Obviously, he didn't play, so James Conner got the call as a sophomore, I believe, at the time, and he finished as RB6, which is incredible. Imagine getting an RB6 at 168. I remember playing against him and just being so pissed because teams were loaded with him because you basically got this free piece. You could have had D-Hop as your first round pick. You could have had whoever you had in the second round pick. And now you got this guy at flex or your RB2, who is just obviously a giant RB1, putting up RB1 numbers. So that was huge leverage, and he outpaced people like David Johnson and Melvin Gordon. So he had a great year. And I think we expected a lot bigger things after that from him, but didn't really see as much. One of the biggest ones I'm going to talk about, Lamar Jackson, one of the best picks on this entire list, and this might be the best leverage pick. We're talking ADP to finishing ratio, where they finished on the year and where their original ADP was preseason. I think Lamar Jackson's got to be the number one on this list. He wasn't drafted the latest. We talk about some undrafted players like Odell and Kyle Rudolph and all these guys, but Lamar Jackson, I think he's a no-brainer here. He was drafted outside the top 100 overall, and what he did was absolutely incredible. One of the most historic fantasy seasons and football seasons ever. He averaged 27.7 fantasy points per game. 27.7. To put this in perspective, Dak Prescott finished second that year with 21.1 points per game. So he had over 6.5 points more than the number two guy. That's absolutely, I'm like legitimately laughing. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. That's bananas. Absolutely incredible. Now, like I said, his ADP was over 100. It was just a ridiculously historic year. He had over 1,200 rushing yards, still led the league. And this is what I know. I'm a big proponent of Lamar can't throw super well, but sometimes you see him sling like we just saw with the Colts game, and he can sling. And this year, he actually led the league in passing touchdowns in a season where I think, Aaron Rodgers and Brady both played, 16 games each. He outpaced them in touchdowns, in passing touchdowns. So, tacked it on to the fact he had a 1,200 rushing yard running back performance. Incredible, absolutely incredible year, and probably the best in my opinion for average draft position. It was hard not to win your league if you had Lamar Jackson that year. And as much as we talk about that, our last player on the board here had a super similar year as well. We had Josh Allen in 2020, who had a very comparable year. He was being drafted very similar, 106 for Josh Allen last year in 2020. And super close year. He actually only finished 20 points behind Lamar Jackson's 2019 season. I think Lamar had 415 points, I want to say, something like that, something crazy, which I think is the best quarterback year we've ever seen. And Josh Allen was at, I think, something like 395 last year. So very similar, very close. He had more passing yards, more passing touchdowns, and more rushing touchdowns than Lamar Jackson during that span. He just got smoked in the rushing yardage. I mean, he's a very good runner. Josh Allen's an awesome runner. We know that. He had 400 rushing yards that year, I believe. But again, 400 rushing yards is not 1,200. But Josh Allen absolutely had a monster year, and I think we might be seeing some of that again as he just had a 40-something point performance last week or the week prior. So he's coming back. But that's going to do it for this list, guys. I thought that was a lot of fun to make. Let me know if you guys liked it. I just found it very interesting. Some of the best draft picks. If you guys have any other ones that you want to add to the list, like I said, this is just from what I found in my opinion on it. You guys could definitely tell me some ones I'm forgetting about, some, absolute sleepers. Like, I think, just off the top of my head, it's like no Sean Moreno. I wonder how, when he was drafted that Super Bowl season and, stuff like that. And what got me talking about this is I like hearing some of your ones from this current season, too. My personal pick is Mike Williams. I don't think anybody can tell me otherwise. I mean, I'm biased. I have him. But I drafted him 131st overall, and he's the number 2 receiver right now. Now, could Mike Williams fall off a cliff and suck the rest of the year? Absolutely. Is he the biggest candidate to do so? Absolutely. The guy's fluky as shit. But that being said, there's definitely some other ones. I'm looking at Debo. He wasn't drafted, as late, but Debo's doing awesome. So I definitely want to hear some of your guys, current picks and who you guys think could turn it around and who you think's going to break out in the next couple weeks here. So thank you guys for tuning in. If you did enjoy it, please like, subscribe, and smash that notification bell. And as always, let's cash.